In Dynasty, it's never just about this season. So whether you're in the playoffs or not, you should already be thinking about the future. In today's video, I'll be looking at my top 30 Dynasty wide receivers, and with just 3 games left in the 2024 fantasy season, these are heavily weighted towards future years. You're kind of getting a preview into the early offseason wide receiver landscape. My name is Paul. This is Pure Potential. If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment. Let's get into it. All right, before we get started, I just wanted to quickly explain what goes into these rankings. I am not a data scientist. I'm not an analytics expert by any means. These rankings are made by hand. They are made with love, and they are certainly not perfect by any stretch. But what I try to do is take into account age, future projected production, obviously. Then I try to layer in things like ceiling. You could see 2 players that are similar age, similar current production, but they could be in different tiers because I see more room to grow for one of those players. And that can sometimes have to do with the talent profile. That can sometimes have to do with situation, which is something that absolutely has to be factored in to dynasty rankings. As much as we want to prioritize talent, as much as we want to chase talent over situation, it is a necessary factor in the ranking process, even if it's just a tiebreaker. But that's enough on the ranking process. Let's jump into these tiers. So right at the top, tier 1, I know it's cliche to have these 2 alone in their own tier, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, but it's cliche for a reason, right? These guys are the best in the business. They will continue to go in the early first round of redraft leagues for the next half decade. Both guys just perform year in and year out, perennial top 5 wide receiver options. There's really not much to say about these guys. I think it's time to consider putting Chase ahead of Jefferson. I don't really know where the consensus is on that. It was clearly Jefferson at the beginning of the season that people had more confidence in. I think now, looking at what Chase is doing, not that it's any kind of a significant margin, but I do think you look at Chase, about a year younger than Jefferson. He's tethered to that elite high volume quarterback in Joe Burrow, and he's just currently lapping the field by 5 points per game, 5 points better than the next closest wide receiver. So I have them both as top 6 overall dynasty assets. I have them back to back in my rankings, but just give me Chase by the tiniest of margins. And then in the second tier of wide receivers, I've got Malik Neighbors, CeeDee Lamb, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that's the order that I have them ranked in. I'm not that picky about how the tiers are ranked, but I am listing them in the order that I do have them ranked in my dynasty rankings. So Malik Neighbors at wide receiver 3. I don't know if that qualifies as a hot take. I don't think it does. He's just been unbelievable as a rookie. He's got a 30% targets per out run. That ranks 5th among all wide receivers. So he is immediately, one of the more dominant target earners in the league. He's a wide receiver 1 in points per game. I think he's wide receiver 11 right now. And he has a 2.01 yards per out run, which is very good for a rookie. It's not like elite overall, but when you consider that his quarterbacks are Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito, it's kind of a miracle that he's over 2 yards per out run. Like Garrett Wilson, we've been making excuses for him for years. He still isn't over 2 yards per out run, and I think he's an incredible wide receiver. But the point is that Malik Neighbors is getting it done despite the offensive concerns. And the cherry on top for him is he doesn't even turn 22 years old until July. So not only is he doing all this as a 21-year-old rookie, he's not even 21 and a half yet. I think this guy has a wide receiver 1 overall ceiling, both in terms of scoring and I think in his dynasty future could be the wide receiver 1 overall. For now, he sits at 3 in my rankings. Following him, we have CeeDee Lamb and Puka Nacua, who strike me as actually pretty similar players at this point. They have a similar ADOT. They have a similar percentage of design targets, similar first read percentage. Their deployment isn't actually that different. They both have good quarterbacks in their 30s. I give the slight nod to Lamb in the ranks just because Dak is younger, so that connection I think can continue for a longer stretch of time. And Lamb has a shorter injury history than Puka does, who does have, stretching back to college, a number of different injuries that he's dealt with. So not something I'm super worried about, just a tiebreaker between those 2 really, really good wide receivers. Behind them, I've got Nico Collins, who is just insanely good. He is leading the league in receiving yards per game. He's got a long-term contract tied to CJ Stroud. He's the same age as Justin Jefferson. There's really not that much to say about him. He has continued to perform, building off of last season, and I think he has earned his spot here in this second tier of elite wide receivers. And he does edge out Amon-Ra St. Brown for me. I know that's not going to be popular with a lot of people. Again, I don't have a strong preference one way or the other. Amon-Ra certainly has been great once again this year. I think he's wide receiver 7 in points per game. He's been a victim of the Lions' success a little bit. Like, he could be having an even better season. It's been leveled out a bit with the touchdown streak that he's been on, but he's played the same number of games as CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase, and just listen to these route run numbers. Okay, Chase has run 521 routes. Lamb has run 456 routes. Amon-Ra has run 355 routes. So despite playing in the same number of games, because the Lions have just been in the driver's seat so often, they've been able to run out the clock. They haven't had to throw as much. And so he is just way behind in the overall routes. When you look at his target earning numbers, targets per out run, you look at his efficiency, yards per out run, he is still an elite wide receiver. He has a very high floor, and he's got a top 5 ceiling. Now, if you want access to my complete top 200 Dynasty rankings, which are updated regularly in season and in the off season, you can hit the join button underneath this video or on my channel page and become a YouTube member. That'll also get you access to private channels in the Pure Potential Discord where you can chat with me pretty much anytime, and weekly members only live streams on YouTube. Now in tier 3, we're looking at Brian Thomas Jr., Drake London, Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown, and Marvin Harrison. I've been extremely impressed with Brian Thomas this year. He remains a priority trade target for me. Right now on his rookie season, 23% targets per out run, 2.38 yards per out run, 14 points per game as a rookie. Very promising, despite dealing with a little bit of a quarterback shuffle, pretty dysfunctional offensive environment, and he's still just 22 years old. So there's a lot to like here with Brian Thomas. There's a lot to build on. I think with a healthy Trevor Lawrence and hopefully a better offensive system in place in 2025, he can really take off and fully break out as a sophomore wide receiver. And then in the process of this exercise, putting these tiers together, I was actually forced to move Drake London up through my research. I didn't quite realize how impressive a season he's having. When you actually stack up his targets per out run, yards per out run numbers against other wide receivers like Amon-Ra, like CeeDee Lamb, like Garrett Wilson, he's really right there with those guys, almost identical. I think it's going under the radar a little bit because the Falcons offense has been a little bit up and down. We've had some spike weeks from Darnell Mooney that have occasionally overshadowed Drake London, but just all in all, turning in a very impressive season. He doesn't turn 24 until July, so he's actually a little bit younger than Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, who are in that same draft class. And what I like about Drake London is he has that safety net at quarterback with Michael Penix waiting in the wings. And that's actually why I moved him one spot ahead of Garrett Wilson in my ranks, because Garrett Wilson's still an incredible player. I think he has continued to be held back by his situation, even this season. Aaron Rodgers has just last week missed him on a wide open touchdown. But the fact is that Garrett Wilson is staring down another offseason of quarterback uncertainty. He's going to be entering his age 25 season next year. And we don't know if he's going to have a rookie, if he's going to have Jameis Winston or some other quarterback under center. We have no idea. And so I do think it makes sense to defer to Drake London a little bit, who, again, is performing at a similar level. And he has that first round quarterback waiting to step in if and when the Falcons decide to pull the plug on Kirk Cousins. And then kind of the old man of this tier, we have AJ Brown sitting there at wide receiver 11 for me. At 27 years old, he just doesn't have a lot of room to grow in value. And his situation is really killing his upside. I think he's a top 5 wide receiver talent in the NFL. His yards per out run of 3.47 is incredible. It's only behind Puka Nacua and Nico Collins this season. I think if he played with Joe Burrow, he could post the type of numbers that we're seeing from Jamar Chase, or at least something very close. But he doesn't. He plays on, right now, the most run-heavy team in the NFL, and that is just limiting his target ceiling. And I don't see the Eagles drastically going away from what they're doing. They're probably going to have Kellen Moore back next year. They're going to have Saquon Barkley next year. I just think at AJ Brown's age, we can't wait around for him to land in that perfect spot for him to post, top 3 wide receiver finish. And so I can't really get him any higher in the ranks than this. But he does sit one spot ahead of the player who was the presumed wide receiver 1 of the 2024 class, which is Marvin Harrison. I would not say has been bad as a rookie. I don't think he's been bad, and I don't think he's going to be a bad player in the league. I think the expectations for Marvin Harrison were a little bit too high. Look at his best ball ADP. He was actually a late first, early second round pick on Underdog. And that's just a really, really high bar for a rookie wide receiver. You know, if you just try to look at his numbers detached from the pedigree and the expectations, they don't look that bad. I'd still say they're a little bit of a disappointment, but when you think of the context of the Cardinals offense and how they're deploying him, they're making him run these very difficult routes. They're not drawing up a lot of easy stuff for him. I think it's excusable that he hasn't fully broken out as a rookie. Now, the only problem is I don't know that that gimme stuff is really ever coming for him. I don't know that that's his game. So you have to hope that he can grow into this role that he has and just straight up get better from one season to the next to really maximize the potential of the routes that he's running. And I think he can do that. And that's why he sits here at wide receiver 12 for me. And again, in the same tier as these other incredible wide receivers. Now, tier 4 is just going to be 3 names. We've got Ladd McConkey, Rashee Rice, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Ladd McConkey here has a real case to push up into the next tier pretty soon. He's just doing everything we could possibly want right now. He's got that 80+ PFF receiving grade. That's a really good sign for rookie wide receivers. 25% targets per out run, 2.56 yards per out run. Those are both elite marks for rookie wide receivers. He's tied to Justin Herbert in the long term, which I love. You know, anytime you can get your wide receivers tied to an elite quarterback talent, that's just what you want, because that is a floor raiser for sure. Think of what we've gone through with guys like Drake London, like Garrett Wilson in the past, who don't have that quarterback figured out. It is so huge to know that for at least the next 3 seasons, he's playing with Herbert. So he has a real case to move up into that next tier. For now, he sits here at the top of tier 4. Then we have Rashee Rice. I've talked about Rice enough on this channel. I don't need to go through his whole resume again, but he was pacing for a top 5 fantasy finish through the first 3 weeks of this year. The Chiefs, in his absence, really have not figured out how to replicate his production. You know, they've used Noah Gray a little bit. They've tried to use Juju a little bit. I think he's going to come back next year. He's going to have a suspension, but after that, he could walk right back into that type of top 5 production when he returns. So he's a pretty tantalizing asset sitting there outside of the top 12 dynasty wide receivers, and I think he could push his way back up into that wide receiver 1 conversation as soon as he's back on the field. And then you have JSN, who, look, one of the biggest L's that I've taken since starting this channel. I'm not going to skirt around it. I'm not going to ignore it. In my year 2 breakouts video, I pointed out some very real red flags in JSN's profile. I was worried about his PFF grade. I was worried about his yards per out run. I didn't want to invest in him at his offseason cost. Now, the good news is that I did advise trading him for a late first. So if you did that, there's a good chance you ended up with Ladd McConkey or Brian Thomas or Bo Nix. Hopefully not Xavier Worthy or Jonathan Brooks, obviously. But the thing with JSN is I'm not entirely sure what the lesson is here. I think it's probably that his college production should have earned him a little bit more grace despite having a poor rookie season. And that's what I'll try to think about moving forward. I don't think we can go back in time and say that his rookie season wasn't bad. It was definitely bad. But we can look at Shane Waldron, right? We can look at the target competition. And I think there were enough pieces there that we could make excuses for that. And now he's wide receiver 15 in points per game at 15.3, very respectable number there. He's still just 22 years old. He's actually a little bit younger than Ladd McConkey. He has fully kicked Tyler Lockett to the curb. So this is just JSN and Metcalf at this point. So, I mean, it's a great trajectory for him, right? You have to love that. And I think he is well deserving of this tier. Tier 5 is, in my opinion, where the rankings become kind of a mess. I mean, I can look at this at different times of day and feel like I prefer these guys in a different order. But this tier is really just full of young wide receiver 2 types. These are either guys that are literally the wide receiver 2 on their own team, or they're guys that produce as wide receiver 2s just due to like situational limitations. So this tier consists of George Pickens, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, Rome Odunze, Josh Downs, and Zay Flowers. And I think Pickens and Olave are the guys I would have the most hope for to potentially jump up into that next tier. Pickens, he's in his 3rd season. He's still just 23 years old. He's commanding a target on 26% of his routes, despite having a pretty high 13.7 ADOT. So it's actually even more impressive to command that type of volume on a high ADOT, and it leads to higher upside, bigger spike weeks. The problem is the Steelers remain one of the most run-heavy teams in the league. We don't know if and when that's going to change. And so it's hard to push him up much higher, but he's absolutely proven to be an excellent wide receiver. And were that situation to change, it would be easy to envision him moving up even higher than this. And then Chris Olave, he's always had the underlying metrics. Like, people have been making the case for him, myself included, since his rookie year. It's why he went in the second round of best ball drafts this summer. That obviously did not pan out. He just hasn't put it all together. He continues to have offensive woes, quarterback questions, concussion issues now, a thing that's popping up. So it's hard to push him much higher, even though I have been very high on the talent. I think it's something where he's just going to have to show us that he deserves to be higher in the rankings. And so this is the tier he's going to stay in until he can do that. You look at T. Higgins, there's some volatility there, probably switching teams this offseason. That means he could potentially land in a better situation. I don't know how many situations out there are actually better. They're probably more of like a lateral move, but there are also situations that are worse. So I do think there's some uncertainty. He's also one of the oldest players in this tier, turning 26 years old in January. That's not old by any means, but it is one of the older guys in the group. But he's been super impressive this year. He's scoring as a top 10 wide receiver in points per game, despite sharing the field with Jamar Chase. I guess that's the power of Joe Burrow throwing for 33 touchdowns and leading the league in pass attempts. But either way, T. Higgins deserves to be here because he is putting that production on the field. You just want to hope he lands on the Chargers or the Patriots, where he can be tied to another promising young quarterback. And then looking at Jalen Waddle, I can't really explain why he has struggled so much this year, outside of the Tua injury, obviously, but I'm just going to trust the longer sample with him. Like we've seen him through year 1, 2, and 3 really just get better in terms of target earning and efficiency. And so I choose to believe that those 3 seasons tell more of the story of Jalen Waddle than just what we've seen this year. At least he's been better in recent weeks, where we can start to see, okay, maybe this offense is clicking a little bit. He's also getting a little bit older. I think he's already 26. So not old, but when wide receivers get to about 26, 27, it becomes very difficult for them to actually maintain their current value from one season to the next. It starts to become this uphill battle where they have to actually exceed expectations to not just lose value year over year. And so it's typically only the really elite guys that are able to stick in that group. Now, I think the hope with Waddle is that he can have a little bit more impressive year next year, and then maybe Tyreek Hill retires, and that becomes a bump to his value as well, where it's like, okay, Waddle is the main guy in the offense. I don't know if it's going to work out that way, but I think that here at wide receiver 19 is a very safe place to have him ranked right now. And then Rome Odunze sticks out as the only rookie in this group. There's really not a ton to be excited about from his rookie season so far, but similar to JSN, this is a strong college prospect, actually has better draft capital than JSN, significantly better draft capital. He's playing in a poorly designed passing game, or at least he was until they fired Shane Waldron. And I'm willing to exercise some patience because he is playing with multiple other established wide receivers. He's had a couple games where you can really see that potential, and I think he's played a lot better than the numbers would suggest. I think his separation stuff looks pretty good, so I'm willing to be patient with him at wide receiver 20 prices. Downs and Flowers round out this group. These are just 2 very solid wide receivers. They might never finish as top 12 guys, but they're very young, and they are very strong target earners. Josh Downs actually still has over a 30% targets per out run on the year. I think that's top 5. And so I'm not even totally convinced. Like if you gave him a high volume quarterback, like if you put him, I don't know, the Bengals maybe not the right fit with Joe Burrow, but if you put him on a team where they were actually going to throw the ball 35 times a game, I do kind of think that he could sneak his way into wide receiver 1 production, because he's not just like this low A-dot slot guy. He can make explosive plays. So I have a soft spot for Downs, but I do think he belongs in this tier along with Flowers, who have both really stepped up in year 2. And then finally in tier 6, we've got Jordan Addison, Jaden Reed, Devonta Smith, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, and Tyreek Hill. Now, if you have been counting all of the wide receivers, you might realize this isn't exactly 30. I said 30 because it's a neater number, but my tiers did not break evenly for me to get to 30. So this is what you're going to get today. And this last tier is 6 wide receivers that really fit into a few different archetypes. We have year 2 guys that have flashed legit upside in Jaden Reed and Jordan Addison. I made the decision to bump Reed down a tier and move Addison up a tier after this last week. It's not that I'm like done with Jaden Reed. I just think that what he is a very inconsistent option because the Packers don't want to use him as a full-time wide receiver. He doesn't play in 12 personnel. He plays in 11, and a lot of times they want to run 2 tight ends, they want to run 2 running backs, and they're just a very run-heavy team overall. So it's just hard to trust that he's going to be that consistent producer like we see with Downs and Flowers. So even if there's an argument that he's more talented than those guys, I just don't think it matters right now. And meanwhile, Addison kind of snuck up on me. You know, this last huge game has skewed his numbers a bit, where it makes all of his averages look good. But those games are part of the deal, right? Spike weeks count. And on the season, he's starting to look very similar to some of these other guys, like a Josh Downs, like a Zay Flowers. And so I think he deserves to be here. He has the potential to maybe even push his way up into that next tier if we can see this success last a little bit longer. Then we have some solid veterans in Devonta Smith, DK Metcalf, and DJ Moore. And these are just really good players who are kind of in no man's land in terms of age and production, right? They're 26, 27 years old, so they're not going to gain value from here. They're not a store of value. You're buying them for production at this point, but they're unlikely to give you elite scoring. I think any of them in the right situation could give you elite scoring. Devonta Smith is on that run-heavy Eagles offense. He plays with A.J. Brown. DK Metcalf, it's getting kind of harder to make excuses for him, but I think right now the issue with Seattle is the offensive line. Just not enough time for those downfield routes to develop for him. It's possible we could see a better season in 2025 if they can shore that up a little bit. And then DJ Moore, he's come on as of late with Shane Waldron out of the picture. He is the oldest of these three, and so I think he belongs here anyway. But he's the one who I think has the clearest path to getting back into that low-end wide receiver 1 or at least high-end wide receiver 2 conversation. And then we end with the only veteran on this list, theoretically an elite producer in Tyreek Hill. Haven't really seen it this year. But I think if you're buying in at this price, you know, kind of late 1 value, I think is where he should settle in, maybe a little bit better than late 1 value. You're just hoping you can get one more peak season out of him in 2025. You know, maybe this wrist injury heals up, the offense finds its rhythm a little bit, and you can get that 18, 19, 20 points per game wide receiver again in 2025 before he kind of ages out, right? It gets really dicey after next year. He'll be 31 and a half, maybe 32, you know, a guy that does rely on elite speed. I still view him as the best of the elite guys. You know, you get down into the tiers below, eventually you run into Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, but I think Hill does stand above the rest. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. That's my top 30 Dynasty wide receivers broken down into tiers for you. Hope you found that helpful. As always, thanks so much for watching the video. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you enjoy my Dynasty content, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. And again, if you're interested in those rankings, the join button is down below. You can try it out for a month, see if they are valuable to you. You can always cancel, no hard feelings, but I do think that they add value. I think they make trading easier. If you have any questions about where I have other wide receivers ranked, you can leave a comment down below and I will try to get to that. I'll be back soon with another Dynasty video. I hope you win your fantasy playoff matchups, and I will see you very soon.